Netflix recently released a documentary series about the death and investigation into Elisa Lam, a young woman who mysteriously disappeared in Los Angeles in 2013. Spoiler alert, her disappearance was puzzling for law enforcement officials, and when they finally found her body floating in a water tank on the roof of her hotel, more questions were raised rather than answered. Admittedly, this was a very confusing case from the outside, and it appears it was no easier to tackle from the inside. A tourist girl goes missing in a dangerous part of the city. The only no-doubt evidence is some incredibly weird security camera footage, and nobody seems to have any clue where she even was.
It did have a funny taste to it.
Early efforts by investigators to find her were futile, even after combing the whole building room by room. When police finally found her body, there was no sign of a struggle and no direct evidence at the scene or in her room. It was almost as if she just walked up there on her own accord and hopped in. That's because that's probably what happened. That didn't stop a faction of the internet from speculating, though. Was she pressured? Was she threatened? Was she duped? All of these are reasonable questions considering the increasingly odd circumstances surrounding her case, but they're also all based in a lack of information. But that's where these web sleuths shine. They dissect every detail of every piece of info they have, but ultimately, they don't have the intel that law enforcement has to come to a clear conclusion. I'm not trying to dunk on these web sleuths. For all intents and purposes, they were wrong and they owned up to it.
Now I realize that the way to honor her is to accept the truth. That this was a tragedy of an accidental death.
They just got invested in a story and wanted answers about a case on a person they found themselves attached to because of her disappearance. There's nothing wrong with that. However, Netflix has another documentary series that involves the word of web sleuths. Don't F with Cats, spoiler alert, revolves around the investigative work of a group of Facebook pseudonyms. These veiled accounts rallied together to find the face behind cat killing and eventually human killing videos on the internet. They're shown to be vengeful but cunning, meticulous but reasonable, and they finally get their guy, Luca Magnotta, with enough patience, except they don't actually end up doing much.
Shut up.
They have the information, and they're the first to see the murder video, sure, but ultimately it's the trash collector who finds the body, the detectives who investigate the security cameras and find his whereabouts, and the police who arrest him. These two documentaries portray web sleuths in slightly different lights, but there are some similarities that are odd considering the full picture of both stories. This is a golden opportunity to discuss how documentarians can assign ethos as they see fit, and how it can be quite easy to be directed by a creative choice in framing. Before you pull your hair out, I do understand the key difference in the web sleuths in these two documentaries. In The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel, these web sleuths, as far as the audience can tell, were wrong on pretty much every step, and in Don't F with Cats, they're right about a lot. My point is that neither ultimately helped to bring justice. In Cecil Hotel, web sleuths completely missed the mark on what happened, and insisted that there was a much more grisly case to be uncovered. In Don't F with Cats, police never end up using the evidence presented to them by the Facebook group members, despite them being largely correct. None of this necessarily matters, though. Ordinary citizens aren't expected to solve crimes, so as long as there's no harm, there's no foul. But both documentaries actually highlight how there was some harm in what they were doing. In Cecil Hotel, there's a man named Pablo Vergara, who was accused of murdering Lam by these web sleuths after videos surfaced of him at the Cecil. They connected that with lyrics in his death metal songs to assert that Vergara was a suspect in Lam's death. Vergara posted a video saying he was innocent, but the death threats and accusations kept coming. The reality of the situation is Vergara wasn't even in the country when Lam was murdered. The video he posted at the hotel was from a year prior to that, and he says he lost all passion for his music as an outlet and even tried to commit suicide from the hate he was receiving. That's genuinely awful, and it's incredibly fortunate that Vergara is still alive and healthy after suffering through that kind of internet abuse. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for Edward Jordan. Jordan was an internet troll that posed as the cat killer in the Facebook group in Don't F with Cats, using a pseudonym and a fake profile picture. Jordan posted a video on his fake account of a cat being burned, and the group jumped all over him for it. Jordan apparently was suffering from depression and using the internet to cope with that before killing himself after receiving a lot of backlash for his post. Now, I want to be unequivocally clear here. Killing a pet is repulsive behavior, regardless of your mental state. There is no excuse for that. Becoming a copycat of an animal murderer on the internet, or really a troll of any kind, is not the correct way to deal with any mental illness ever. Also, nobody will ever truly know if the internet backlash is what pushed him over the edge. All of that is true, and I am not defending his actions. However, if he was the one that burned the cat in the video, which is unclear considering the rest of the information on his pseudonym account was fake, his punishment should never have been suicide. He should have been reported and charged with a crime and faced whatever conviction was due for him. If it wasn't him that burned the cat and he just pulled the video from somewhere else, that's even worse. That doesn't excuse him from disseminating horrible videos on the internet and receiving hateful comments because of it, but the bottom line is he never should have killed himself regardless of the reason why he did. In fact, the two main leaders of that Facebook group portrayed in the documentary, under the names Body Movin' and John Green, even say that they didn't believe it was him that made the original killing videos and tried to explain that. None of the evidence they had found matched up with Jordan, and they tried to convince other members of the group to lay off, but they didn't. I'm not quick to defend Jordan for acting the way he did, in fact I won't at all, but even Body Movin' herself explains how precarious of a situation this was.
Nobody knows, and I'm not certainly saying that he killed himself because of this witch hunt against him. But you do have to be careful because you don't know who's on the other end of the computer and what kind of mental problems they might have.
The crux of all of this is to show that there is harm to be done by people falsely accusing others of things on the internet.
I could be anybody I want online.
While the similarities in these two documentaries are interesting, I would argue that the differences are much more important. Let's start with Don't F With Cats. In this one, the web sleuths begin as a small group of Facebook friends that are looking for clues as to who this cat killer is. They dig up every little detail they can on him and eventually find out the guy they feel is responsible is Luca Magnotta. After some more digging, they believed Magnotta was living in Toronto, and they only decided to contact the Toronto police once they had enough information. This ultimately led to another dead end, but then the killer resurfaced after he posted a new video, this time killing a human man named Lin Jun. The group then contacted the police again, but this time the detective was on vacation, and the Montreal police got on the case before that detective came back. That's just bad luck there.
Holy shit.
This is probably the best course of action that they could have taken, so although I spent all of that time talking about how they didn't actually do anything in the end, they were 100% within reason in their actions, and likely would have been very helpful had Magnotta not been so tough to catch, and had that detective not been on vacation. The sleuths are framed very positively in this documentary, and it's justified for two reasons. One, they were right. They did everything they could, and they came up short, but it was still admirable. Two, the point of any documentary is to accurately and exhaustively tell a compelling story. Regardless of whether these web sleuths actually slap the handcuffs on Magnotta, their stories are real and intriguing. The fact that this group of misfit accounts spent the time and energy into this case and had more information than law enforcement officials for a time is fascinating.
I'm glad that we went through it together.
All of this context is important to understand before looking at how web sleuths are framed in the Cecil Hotel doc. The overall structure of these two series may seem similar at first. Both are very coy about the information that they give out and how they do so. They build these expositions on the players at hand, they drip feed information into a crescendo before a final, mostly definitive conclusion. That might sound generic, but documentaries can be set up in various ways. The Jeffrey Epstein documentary on Netflix takes absolutely no time to accuse Epstein of many crimes, and that was probably a good stylistic choice for that topic, just as this was a solid setup for Magnotta's killings and Lam's death. However, while these two may seem similar, they have some details that make them seem quite different in retrospect. A majority of the first episode of Don't F With Cats basically revolves around the web sleuths flopping and not finding much of anything. It feels a little pointless, but I imagine the purpose was to establish a groundwork for the amount of effort they were putting into finding the man behind these cat videos. In The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel, the majority of the first episode is spent centered around the eerie history behind the hotel, and Skid Row, and how it was a hotspot for death and murder.
This is a space where people are allowed to just suffer.
This basically is doing the same thing as the first episode of Don't F with Cats, where it's providing the parameters of the discussion. However, the stark difference between the two is that Don't F with Cats has an exposition that is tied directly to the eventual arrest of Magnata. It's a long road to follow, but it is without a doubt the same road beginning to end. In Cecil Hotel, we found out that Lam likely was struggling hard with her bipolar disorder and accidentally drowned herself. Even the sleuths who thought otherwise come to see the light on that. That means that all of this exposition is not designed to provide more background on the actual disappearance. It's designed to provide more background on the speculation surrounding the disappearance. That would be a perfectly fine path to take if the documentary was intended to be about the speculation that surrounds a death like this, but it's clearly not. The full title is Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel, yet they spend an incredible amount of time discussing information that has literally nothing to do with the crime scene or the vanishing. Perhaps that wouldn't be a big deal, but the cherry on it all is that the discussion of Skid Row and the eerie past of the Cecil is all designed to be fodder for these takes by web sleuths that, and I can't stress this enough, were not correct and almost brought a man to kill himself. If you've seen the documentary, you might be thinking, Oscar, they show these web sleuths apologizing and show remorse for peddling unfounded rumors. Sure, but not only do they spend a lot of time indulging those rumors, they also seem to lull the audience into believing that a lot of these theories were plausible by showing a journalist who says, yeah, this is pretty crazy, and the detective saying, I can definitely see why people were so interested in this case. All of this goes back to what a documentary is supposed to be, an entertaining, accurate story. You can make the argument that because these were real takes by real people, they were worth including in the documentary, and I wouldn't fight you on that, but a disproportionate amount of time is spent on them rather than Lam.
You can really get a good sense of how kind of scary it is.
It's clear once the series is over that this framing was merely entertaining, solely entertaining, but it also feels very Trojan horsed by the creators because what the sleuths are saying ends up being so pointless. On top of that, I ask you, are rumors truly that fascinating? I get that people love gossip. I'm not naive enough to say otherwise, but is it truly more fascinating than the real story of a girl that vacationed away from home and drowned herself in a water tank and wasn't found for weeks? For example, if the Ted Bundy tapes had 50% more random people making assumptions about where he was or how he escaped custody or any of that, would that really make it more entertaining? Probably not. And if you want to include those things in the documentary, don't make it the star of the show. Quick editor's note, I didn't realize until quite late into the process, after this was scripted and recorded and whatnot, that the guy who made Cecil Hotel also made the Ted Bundy tapes. At first I thought that was pretty damning to my point. You know, if he knew what he was doing with the Ted Bundy tapes, why wouldn't he know what he's doing with the Cecil Hotel, or why would he make this decision? But I actually think that it kind of strengthens the argument in a certain way, because I quite enjoyed the Ted Bundy tapes. I thought he did quite a good job with that. So why would he take such an unreasonable approach when it came to the Cecil Hotel? I just find it very odd. But anyway, sorry, commercial break over. Maybe you feel that more context, regardless of how helpful, is good. And if that's the case, then just don't make 4 episodes. This is a series that probably could have been cut down to 2-hour-long pieces. One to set up the hotel's background, Lam's medical history, and her disappearance, cliffhanger that they find her body at the end of the first episode, start with that in episode 2, give the web sleuths a wee bit of play in the second episode as the detectives explain what they find, and that's it. You can still give that context and not sacrifice the heart of the story. Instead, the series was stretched out and gave credibility to these web sleuths in the name of entertainment before trying to take it away to right that wrong, but the creators probably should have just cut out the middleman on that one.
It was, what's the word? I can't think of a word.
It was horrendous.
It was horrendous, yeah.
I find both of these stories intriguing, and although it's pretty clear I enjoy Don't F with Cats much more than Cecil Hotel from a structural standpoint, both have merit. Both tell tales that are almost difficult to imagine, and both also show the potential pitfalls that web sleuths can fall into when mysterious cases like these come up. But the framing in Don't F with Cats is consistent throughout, so even when the stars of the show eventually play an almost non-existent role in the story, the series is still being honest. Cecil Hotel doesn't feel that way. It feels like it doesn't have a problem being a bit disingenuous to keep the unsuspecting viewer watching, and that's too bad, because it has a really great story to tell in between the pointless stuff.
If someone were to ask me how many hours I've spent on this case, it will go into the territory of hundreds, maybe thousands of hours.